Just wanted to give you an overview of Nimitz and development program. The overview I'll give you today is on how the product works, first and foremost, how it differs to other products, and also some of the field results we've seen in Australian trials. I guess one of the reasons for speaking today is the registration process and trying to update industry on our expected timelines and crops that we're looking to develop. So an overview of Nimitz: it's a unique nematicide. It has true nematicidal activity. The active ingredient is fluindsulfone, so it's a new active ingredient to Australia and globally. Now it's used as a pre-plant application to control primarily root knot nematode, but as the project's continued and we've done more work, there's a lot more species that it can control. It's just a bit more selective than the traditional products that growers and advisors are used to working with. So it's a bit more case by case on what it will and won't control. The first label has fruiting vegetables, which includes obviously cucurbits and then tomatoes, capsicums, etc. We also worked with industry this year to support an off-label permit for sweet potatoes, which covers not just Queensland, unlike fruiting vegetables, which is restricted to Queensland at this stage. The features and benefits of fluindsulfone versus other nematicides. For a start, I mean, it's a new mode of action, so there's no issue with accelerated degradation and other problems that you can see with older products. The true nematicidal activity means that once the nematodes are exposed to a sufficient dose, the effect is permanent and irreversible, and I'll show you some just some core work we've done to demonstrate that. It's a relatively safe product for growers to use as well, so it's not an S7, it's an S6, so still some safety equipment required, but compared to what they're used to, it's a relatively benign product by comparison. Growers that are already using nematicides, so we've lost access to phonamifos in most vegetable crops. If you're geared up to apply a product like that or metham, then you can apply Nimitz. You don't need any extra gear to apply it. The other thing that's good about Nimitz is you don't have to apply high rates. They're talking about relatively small quantities of formulated product per hectare that you're needing to apply, whereas some of the other products in this segment, it's quite high use rates. They're quite bulky products to use. So an overview of the mode of action. So within an hour of becoming exposed to fluindsulfone, most of this work is done in bioassays in the initial stages because nematodes move in a film of moisture around the root system and in soil. The bioassays are quite indicative of the activity you're likely to see in soil. So when you expose, say, root knot nematode to fluindsulfone at a sufficient dose, within an hour they will stop feeding. They can become paralysed, and within about 1 to 3 days, the effect, the nematode will die. If you expose an adult, but not at a sufficient dose necessarily to kill the adult nematode, the eggs laid are largely unviable, or any eggs that are laid, if they hatch, they'll produce a juvenile that won't progress through its whole life cycle. So the net result is the same either way. It does have some activity on eggs as well. Eggs that hatch, they don't receive enough dose to inhibit the emergence of the juvenile. They still won't survive through to the adult stage. In a lot of cases, they can't even infest the host plant, and certainly can't reproduce and produce more nematodes. So some in vitro studies I mentioned before, where they've exposed root knot nematode in basically in water, different doses of either, in this work it's either Nimitz or it's 2-OP nematicides. So after 24 hours you can see how many juvenile nematodes have been immobilised, and depending on the concentration, and obviously the OPs can be quite rapid. We know that as insecticides too, they're very quick in their activity. After 48 hours, you can see there's a bit closer result between the Nimitz and the OPs. So that's fine. It's when you actually take the nematodes and you remove the nematicide, so you rinse them, you put them in clean water, and then you see what the response is then. You can see it's still a very high level of immobilisation, 90% plus from fluindsulfone versus the OPs. The reason for that is that the OPs and the carbamates are nematostatic, so they don't necessarily kill the nematode unless there's a sufficient dose there long enough for them to not survive and feed. And so that they can recover, or if there's an accelerated degradation issue, which we have seen quite a bit in Australia with alkaline soil or repeated use and microbial degradation, then you can see a relatively short life from those products. So moving on to application, like I said, if you're using other nematicides, then you're pretty well geared up to use Nimitz. You can put it out via a broadcast or banded spray and then mechanically incorporate and irrigate, or you can use irrigation in a drip irrigation setup, which, let's face it, most of the situations would be that way. You can use the irrigation to incorporate the nematicide to the 15 to 20 centimetre depth, which is a typical depth you're looking for. Now, in the case of sweet potatoes, we're not endorsing the drip irrigation application. We don't have enough data. We're not confident enough in it yet from a crop safety point of view and efficacy. My personal opinion, I like the sprayed and mechanically incorporated then irrigation method. I think it's the most robust over a whole lot of trials. But you look where the drip irrigation method has been used and done well, there's not a lot in it. In most cases, you can't pick a difference where they're put out side by side. So the incorporation and irrigation post-application is very important. So moving on to the field performance, just to give you just a little look at some of the results we've generated. The first point is it's very difficult to get really good nematicide trial data, and you probably work on maybe 1 in 3 or 4 trials where you get compelling data, because there's just so much background noise and the populations can be quite variable across a paddock. With the trial contractors we work with, we've resorted to inoculating sites where it's possible. Obviously, you don't want to inoculate sites on farm where you can avoid it. But in the interest of getting a good efficacy data, we've had to do this to get enough data to convince a reviewer. So in Australia, we've done more than 60 trials, and at any one time, we've got at least 10 trials active in the various crops we're working on. So we've done the fruiting vegetable work, that's on label. The root and tuber crop work has been largely completed, so we're moving to the write-up phase, and also sugarcane. In the case of sugarcane, we're looking at controlling a Pratylenchus, a root lesion nematode species, which is one of the few that Nimitz does reliably. So some of the parameters you measure in these trials, obviously you look at the root system and the damage to the root system, and whether you've prevented that with the nematicide. Where possible, you take soil counts, so you're collecting samples from plots and then doing extractions, mainly through Graham Sterling's lab. And we also measure, most importantly, vigour and yield. Are you getting a response that is measurable? 2 trials from Bowen from about 5 years ago. You've got about 11 weeks after application and about 9 weeks after transplanting, I should say. There's 2 different crop types here, and this is a naturally infested site. We didn't have to inoculate this site. And you can take that as a percentage effect on root knot galling severity. So it's a visual rating of how badly the root knot nematode have damaged the root system. You can see there's a rate response pretty much in both crop types between the 4 and the 8 litres of Nimitz. The 8 litres under moderate to high pressure is more comparable with the standard treatments. When the pressure is lower, we often see not a lot of difference between any of the treatments, and in most cases you're less likely to see a yield response anyway. So the 8 litres we're quite confident is robust under high pressure and under lower pressure as part of a management program, the 4 litres is quite robust as well. In terms of yield responses, you get to nematicides, and Nimitz in particular. It follows the previous slide in terms of the ranking of yield versus the protection of the root system. You've got about more than 10% yield increase from both crop types, particularly at the 8 litre rate of Nimitz, and compared to Nemacur. In a lot of trials, both in Australia and globally, we've seen accelerated degradation of OPs, and so you get quite a short life out of them. In many trials, we've seen the OPs fail outright. So just to summarise that efficacy work, under low pressure, as I've said, you know, most of the treatments, if they're reasonably effective, you won't see a difference between them. Under high pressure, I'd say the 8 litres of Nimitz is more equivalent to Phonamifos, and both of those are generally better than the 4 litres. We have enough trials over enough years to have confidence in that, and we've labelled we've written our label accordingly. Nimitz at 4 and 8 litres is better than, I left that open, it's better than other products that have an accelerated degradation issue. And you can see that with just about all the options we've got now. You can see accelerated degradation. In those situations where you have a problem, I know of a few farms, there's one in particular in the Burdekin I can think of off the top of my head, where that's a massive problem for that grower, and having an alternative product there. And there's others coming onto the market too that you can rotate, should produce some more sustainable options for growers. So the other conclusion is safe and effective when you use it according to the label guidelines, and it's certainly equivalent when you use it in the right way to the existing standards. So I guess moving along to the point of where we're going to from here. So the global development has been ongoing since 2005. There's been a lot of trial work. I mean, it's well north of 1,000 trials that would have been done globally. It'd be probably closer to 2,000. It's registered in several countries, including Australia. There's some other big markets like Brazil. Their sugarcane opportunity is significant, plus all of the other crops we're looking at, including citrus is another one. But yeah, their registration, their regulators are a bit slower, a bit more complicated a process than ours, and so they're still a year or two away. Some of the most important points of this whole process is the MRLs. So we have Codex MRLs for fruiting vegetables already established. So Adama have worked with Codex to establish those. We've got to expand that list, and I'll explain why in a moment. That the work and the crops that, as we register, goes hand in hand with the Codex process and having the flexibility to be able to use Nimitz without a whole heap of restrictions. So the registration we got in Q3 2015, and there was a couple of issues that we still have to address. So we got what you call a conditional registration, and there was a couple of data requirements that we didn't have straight up. We thought we had addressed them already, but the way it's the residue definition that was selected, the main issue is the metabolites from fluensulfone. They're non-toxic, but they're quite residual, and so it poses a trade risk that has to be managed until we address that with the Codex process. So the issue is if they're residual in soil, then rotational crops are picking up those metabolites at levels that are detectable. So while you have Codex and MRLs in Australia for the fruiting vegetables, for the label crops, you don't have it for everything else you might grow afterwards. And if they're building up in, say, cereals, for example, if you grow a cereal crop after using fluensulfone, if there's enough of it there, it could create an animal transfer issue. So APVMA asked us for an animal transfer study and also a rotational crop residue study, both of which we've completed, and the story is good. They're also looking to change the residue definition. So the long and short of it is we're trying to address all these issues in our next submission. So the timing is pretty good to get the residue trial work, to get these other studies, have all the efficacy data ready, and then we can hopefully unlock it from just being a Queensland-only fruiting vegetable registration to being an Australia-wide product with a greater range of crops on there as well. So we're looking at Q4 to submit, and then you're looking at least probably 15 months by the time we go through the trade advice process and everything. It'll be quite a large submission. So you're probably talking about late 17, early 2018 that will have a bigger, more flexible label. So in the meantime, in terms of the plant back intervals, it's critical that people or growers using this product, advisors working with it, understand these issues, and the label and the conditions of registration pretty much address that. So for the existing crops on the label, there's no issue with plant back, it's other crops. So lettuce doesn't pick up these metabolites, but most of the other crops there is a risk there. So it varies on the crop and whether we've got studies to support it. But most of the crops, you know, not least of which cereals, are a big cereal and beef producer and exporter, you're talking about a 2-year interval, which does count some growers out, obviously. And it's one of the reasons why we ended up with a Queensland-only registration to start with, is because of that risk. So we've supported the emergency use permit for potatoes, given the situation with Phonammophos, and we're hoping to add that to the label in the submission I've mentioned already. So if you want more information, there's an Adamus stand here, and there's some staff here that you can speak to. Luke Collins is the product manager for Nimitz, so we put a lot of work into it. So if you see him, you want to know about Nimitz as well, by all means, talk to the guys. Stewardship requirements, there's some a declaration that has to be filled in when growers first use it, and advisors. And there's also accreditation program. So it's only available through these innovation centres under what you call an agency agreement, so we can have the stewardship process hand in hand. And you can see why. There's a few caveats on the label that need to be adhered to. So just, you know, without sounding too bureaucratic or restrictive, you know, we really need to stick to these guidelines on the label and the permit until we address these issues. And any growers that feel like they can't follow that, they probably need to look at an alternative until they can meet these requirements, or until the label's updated and it's flexible enough for your situation. So look, just to summarise, I think it's pretty clear that Nimitz is a unique product. It's a new option for growers and for our industry. A true nematicide, so it's pretty much the first in its class to have these attributes. You know, it's a long development process. It's the biggest project that Adam has ever worked on by far, and probably the most costly. But we can see it being, you know, filling a real market need for another mode of action, a new product for this segment. It's a key product for fruit and vegetable growers. We think in Australia it's part of the toolkit. Hopefully other products will come into this segment too, so there's a bit more sustainable range of options. You know, it's key on root knot nematode. That's, I emphasise that point, it's its main strength. There's a lot of label extension work going on, as you can see. We're keen to look at other options too, so that'll be really in consultation with the various cropping industries. And in the meantime, just like to close, the stewardship side of this product is very important, and we really want to work closely with growers and advisors to ensure that we do it right with this launch. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. Cheers.